I often get asked about my business journey, but the truth is the seed that begins an entrepreneur's journey begins in your bones. It's part of your character that you want to create something and do something different than following the traditional, conventional employment path. This is the moment I realized I was different. In each of our lives, there is a moment. The moment where a thought enters your mind and it transforms your world. It grips and holds on to your imagination. It snowballs and you become obsessed by it. It's the seed that grew the life I have now. And it was the seed of a rubber tree. I grew up on a rubber plantation, as far away from the slick shopping malls on Orchard Road as you can imagine. My family is from Ipoh, a two-street cowboy town in Malaysia. The rubber plantation was in the middle of nowhere. I can only describe it as a kampong upbringing. In order to even get to where we live, you have to drive deep into the plantation, surrounded by huge, tall trees. I remember the world as one large shaded space. The driveways, the paths are all shaded by tall rubber trees. As a result of this isolation on the plantation, my brother became my only playmate. I eventually went to a convent school in town, but didn't have the opportunity to hang out and socialize after school because of how long it took to get home. So instead of hanging out with friends, I would read Enid Blyton's books and fantasize about other worlds. Those worlds were not those of the magic faraway tree, but instead England itself, with its cold cobblestone streets and old sweet shops. To me, it was complete escapism. There was life beyond this little town that I could never possibly reach. As I grew older, many of my male cousins were privileged enough to go to study abroad to England, Australia, and Canada. I would pore over their photos at family gatherings, oohing and eyeing at the fact that London Bridge was actually real. My heart began to yearn, then ache for the same opportunities. When I was 16 years old, wearing my blue pinafore with my white shirt at the school gate, I had a wake-up call. We had just received our latest results, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to get into university in the rat race that was Malaysia at the time. So, how do I get out? I had this thought, wow, the smart kids are all going to further their education. They're going to get out of here. The rich kids are going to go overseas. And I want to go. I really want to go. But I'm going to be stuck here barefoot and pregnant if I don't do something. The thought began to build in my mind. I could not stop thinking about this little dream of mine to get out of here. I started talking to my cousins about it and finding out what life was like as a Malaysian abroad. I didn't even know if we had enough money. Finally, I asked my mom, "Do you think Dad would let me go study overseas?" "Well, if you study hard and get grades, why not study here in Malaysia?" she said. A sudden shame washed over me, quickly replaced by indignation. I didn't have the grades to study in Malaysia. You had to be the top of the top, and it was too late for me to be the top of the top and get straight A's. Plus, as a Chinese in Malaysia, we were second-class citizens. There would be no space for me. This was replaced by the thought that, hey, why should grades define me? I continued to research my dream. A dream without planning and research will never manifest. This is something I took with me into building Motherswork too. Finally, I mustered up enough courage to ask my father if my dream was a possibility. In my auntie's house one night after dinner, my dad sat with my grandmother, and I recall he wore thick rimmed glasses. He had a checked short sleeve shirt, and he was chatting casually with my grandma. I sat down next to him and I said, "Dad, do you think it's possible that I could study overseas?" He paused. It wasn't an immediate no, which in my 16-year-old mind was great news. Then the question started. What if you go and you don't come back? What if you go and marry an Ang Mo? Why can't you study here? All the typical questions a Chinese father of the time would respond with. My grandmother, who has been listening, shifted in her seat, adjusted her floral samfu. She looked up and said, "What have you got to lose? If she wants to go, let her go." My father turned to her. "Will you guarantee that she will come home?" Grandma looked up with her curly white perm hair and said, "Sure, where can I sign?" Later, I pulled my grandma aside and I said, "Apo, what if I don't come back? How can you guarantee?" She turned around, she looked at me, she winked and she said, "What's he going to do to me? By that time, I'll be dead anyway." In fact, up to this point, I believed I was just one of her many grandchildren, the daughter of her youngest daughter. But I'm so glad I was the one she stood up for that day. This was the first time, but not the last time, where I would take my own future into my own hands. I ended up having my own Enid Blyton adventure, living and working in Australia, USA, China, and Hong Kong. Eventually settling here in Singapore, which has become my home, and where my Motherswork journey began. Why am I telling you this story from my book? Because I like to share and hopefully empower you with a few important takeaways during these challenging times. A dream doesn't manifest without reflection, research, and planning. Just like it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to build a dream to reality too. We rarely achieve a dream without the help of others. So always honor and be grateful to those around you. This sense of adventure and wanting to do things differently is a trait that you will find in most entrepreneurs. So if you're an entrepreneur waiting to happen, yes, you mama, sitting there at home in your nursing chair with messy hair at 3 a.m. just after doing a night feed, exhausted, but with dreams of setting up your own business in your head, thinking that it is impossible because here you are, now a mom, trapped. I want you to know that limiting belief is not true. You can do it. This is my story, but this well could be a story about you too, because Woman was written for all of you. Women who are mums, because we are warriors and capable of so much more than we think. As long as you have that spark, that little flame inside you that makes you feel like you want to burst out of your body and take flight. I wrote this book during the height of COVID-19 pandemic, when most of us felt trapped during lockdown with no end in sight. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is always light at the end of the tunnel. And that is also the message that I want to convey, not just to all of you out there who buy this book, but also to the youth of Halogen Foundation. You see, the sales and proceeds of this book go directly to Halogen Foundation, a non-profit organization that empowers youth from demographics that are usually often ignored. Youth with potential burning in them, but often have their dreams snuffed out just because they are from challenging backgrounds and often with difficult circumstances. Halogen empowers these youth with leadership programs and arms them with practical entrepreneurship skills so that we can inspire and influence a generation of young people to lead themselves and others well. But someone has to give you that first push. That's what I want for anyone reading this, to believe in yourself, find and embrace your courage, and be the best version of yourself. And for all you moms out there, remember, be the mother you want to be.